Welcome to Cocktails in the War Room, everybody. What's going on? It's Mistress Carrie. This is episode 148 of Cocktails in the War Room. I am your host, Mistress Carrie. Thank you for joining me. And as you can tell, my co-host, my sidekick, my partner in crime, Wednesday the Goth Pug, is all sorts of wound up tonight. So if you are new to the show, welcome to Cocktails in the War Room. And, well, this is what happens when Wednesday gets involved. We go off the rails. The first thing I need to do is I need to find out if I sound okay. And there's a very specific reason why I'm asking you that. Do you want to say hi, Wednesday? Come here. Because I'm trying out new equipment tonight that we got for the big 150th episode party. So you guys need to let me know. How do I sound? Good? Can you hear me clear? Do I sound better than normal? Is there an echo? Yes, she is feisty tonight, Mark. Let's see. What are we drinking tonight? I'll get that in a minute. Keith says I'm good. Sounds good to me, says Tracy. Eric says sounds good. Okay, well, this is fantastic. I'm very excited. I thought it was all going to work right. I've been beta testing it, but you just never know until you go live. So knowing that everything works is awesome, because this is going to give me the ability to have more running microphones during the show. Before, I could only have 2 working microphones. When we had the 1-year anniversary party, I only had 2 microphones. But we're going to have guests and so much. Hey, get down off the table. We're going to have so much going on at the boat for the 150th episode party that I wanted to be able to incorporate more microphones. Hold on. Wednesday. She's finding her hidden treats on the table. Wednesday, come over here. Come on, over here. Sit down nicely. Let me turn your camera on so everybody can say, hey, don't you dare. Sit nicely. Sit back nicely. Nicely. No, back up. Down. Nicely. There you go. Wednesday's best pal, Zero, is here too tonight. Can you be a good girl? Can you look up here? Say hi, everyone. Hello. Sit nicely. Good girl. Can I have you? No. Sit. Sit. Sit down. Sit. Paw. Shh. Shush. There you go. All right, all the cookies are gone. So you can stay for the show if you want to. Here. But the cookies are gone. That's all you get. Let's see. Like always, you sound great. Thanks, Joe. I appreciate that. Sounds good down here in Texas, says William. Well, thank you for joining the show, William. Sounds good. Looking good too, says Sean. I appreciate that. Okay, so now that I know everything sounds okay, and hey, Wednesday, get off. That's new equipment. Don't you dare. Okay, so let me officially welcome you to Cocktails in the War Room. This is episode 148. I'm Mistress Carrie. Just in case you're new to the show, you may not know who I am. You may not understand what the War Room is. And for everybody that's been here for all 148 episodes, pardon my repetitiveness, but there's always new people coming in and out of the War Room, so I want to make sure they feel included. So if you just found Cocktails in the War Room because of the Mistress Carrie podcast or the Mistress Carrie radio show where you are, Cocktails in the War Room is something we do every Tuesday night at 8:30. We get together to talk about the week, talk about music, talk about the podcast, kind of talk about everything that's going on. This started back on March 14th of 2020 at the very beginning of the lockdown. And we did it 80 nights in a row. And then when we launched the Mistress Carrie podcast, Cocktails in the War Room became a weekly thing. And we are now at episode 148. And coming up in a couple weeks, it's going to be episode 150. And I'm going to tell you all about the giant bash that we're having to celebrate the 150th episode. If you are new to Cocktails in the War Room, I'm going to ask you to comment in the comments section so we all know you're here, and the War Room family, as they have named themselves, can properly welcome you to the War Room. But let us know if this is your first time, and let us know where you're watching from so that we can welcome you to the War Room family. You can also log on to mistresscarrie.com, go to my blog right off the main page of the website, and go all the way to the first blog post, and you're going to find something called the Dictionary. Dictionary. The dictionary is a glossary and kind of a behind the scenes guide to the shorthand and the inside jokes that we all share here in the War Room, because we don't want you to be left behind. And it's 148 episodes worth of inside jokes, and there's a lot to process. So we put them up there as a glossary, and it's constantly getting upgraded and updated with new terms and inside jokes, including Wednesday knocking all the pillows off the green couch here in the War Room, which is something that she does every time. Can you not do that? What are you doing? Why do you like to knock the pillows? Why? Why do you like to knock the pillows off the couch? There you go. Sometimes Wednesday misbehaves here in the War Room, but lately, have you guys noticed, like, she wants to be on the show more. She almost hit her mark tonight. Like, she's on camera, kind of. It's like she wants everybody to know she's here. I think maybe she's getting a little bit big of a head going on with her. But when the show started, it was originally just on my phone. And then over the course of 148 episodes, we've expanded to go from me just holding the phone to the phone being on a tripod with a light, to me getting the software that allows us to be able to put graphics and websites and whatever. And when I did that, I created a camera just for Wednesday. And sometimes she wants to be on the show and sometimes she doesn't. And the last, say, month and a half, I don't know if it's the bribery getting her to show off her tricks in here, but now I think she knows when I start setting up the gear in the War Room, that she comes in here and jumps on the green couch. Now, just in case you're wondering why I call it the War Room, it's actually a room in my house that I've been calling the War Room for the 11 years that I've lived here. It's a room that is filled with military memorabilia from my family's service in the military, from my trips overseas, which we're going to talk a little bit about tonight. It's also where the bar is. So when a lot of my friends and family that have served in the military come to the house, this is where they want to drink a really good glass of scotch and tell war stories. And so when I started going live last March during the very beginning of COVID-19, we just kind of named the show Cocktails in the War Room, and then you'll see on the screen, we made artwork for it, and then we made t-shirts, and now you can get Cocktails in the War Room t-shirts and hoodies in the online store at mistresscarrie.com, and it's just become a thing that we do. No way, Savello's joining us in the War Room tonight? What's up, Savello? Ooh, we got to talk, Savello. I miss you. Savello is one of the guys I was in Afghanistan with. Let me tell a quick story about Savello. Savello, correct me if I'm wrong, dude. He was an E8 at the time when I was in Afghanistan with him. He was a member of the 182nd Infantry of the Mass Army National Guard. And he had an issue of Rolling Stone magazine in his little plywood office. And it had a picture of Amy Winehouse on it. And Savello is or was obsessed with Amy Winehouse. And when you walked into his office, you first had to address Amy Winehouse and you had to say hi to Amy. And it's one of the things that just kills me. What's up, Dave? I did not pop that bottle that you guys got us as a wedding gift yet because I wanted to do it with the hubs and he's been gone. So I have not opened it yet, Dave, but I appreciate it. And once again, thank you and Jeanette, and thank you for your service, Mr. Ulrich. So a lot of my friends jumping on tonight, which I love. Cheers to you guys. Now, if you are new to the War Room, you can tell what I'm drinking based on the glass. Copper mugs mean I'm having a Moscow Mule. This is a very special Moscow Mule because it is a Cocktails in the War Room glass from the early stages of the show. Delicious. Nice and cold, too. Do you guys see Wednesday's tail over there? Do you see it? Do you see that? What are you doing? You're just over there hanging out, wiggling your tail? Why are you looking at me like that? Do I owe you money? Let's see. What's going on, Kevin? What's up, Julie? Savello, I did not catch a response. Was I correct that it was a Rolling Stone issue of Amy Winehouse? All right. Wednesday took off, so I don't know where she went. But I love it when my AAF to Afghanistan and Boston to Baghdad guys join us in the war room. So many of the nights that we've told stories here in the war room have involved those guys. And I just love it when they hang out with me in the war room. Tried the hard coffee, pretty good, says Carol. Yes, it's delicious. What's up, Veronica? Hello to you. Let's see. Dina says Aerosmith History Day in Sunapee, New Hampshire, September 11th and 12th, 2021. Very interesting. That's very cool. Let's see. Loved seeing you on the Breaking the Ice podcast. Yeah. So there's a lot going on. And I meant to actually make a graphic for that for the War Room this week, and I totally forgot. So for the Breaking the Ice podcast, guys, I apologize. But you are going to find 2 new posts in the Mistress Carrie blog at mistresscarrie.com. One of them is a new podcast called Crazy Radio Stories. And the episodes are really short. They're only supposed to be like 10 minutes long, but it's a podcast produced by a former radio person interviewing radio people about the craziest stories from their radio career. And they asked me to be on it. And so Crazy Radio Stories, that episode is linked in my blog, which you can check out and you can hear for yourself what crazy radio story I decided to share on the podcast. And then also this week, this week's episode of the Breaking the Ice podcast featuring Mike Shue, Josh Dolan, and Isaiah Moskowitz, all of whom I worked with at WAF. They asked me to be the guest on the Breaking the Ice podcast, and that is up in my blog at mistresscarrie.com as well. Loved the huge guest that you dropped on Josh's podcast. Well, Mark, we're going to talk about that this week because that's this week's guest. Lake Sunapee is a great place, says Eric. Hello. What's going on? Ellen got thrown in Facebook jail, had to hijack my mother's old Facebook. Ellen says, you guys in your Facebook jail. So go to my blog, check out those episodes. Cheers to all of, oh gosh. My drink stuck to my coaster. So my coaster, I was afraid it was going to break, but my friend Duncan is a tour guide, and he does guided tours of World War II battlegrounds, and he made these coasters for me for the War Room. And that's his website, and he is a World War II historian, and he does guided tours, and I am hoping to go on one sooner than later. And so he made me coasters for the War Room, which I love. Carrie, are you still in touch with Ian Barrett? Where did he end up? He actually, I am still in touch with Ian Barrett, and he has his own production company, and he's killing it. He's doing all kinds of video production for websites and television production. And Ian's still around for sure. Was it you screaming walk with Dimebag? Jacob, believe it or not, no, it was not that. It was really hard for me to just pick one crazy radio story. I selected a story that more involved actually being on the air and something I couldn't believe I got away with that didn't get me fired. I thought maybe that would be a little bit more appropriate for a podcast called Crazy Radio Stories. What's going on, Mickey? Walter, get the paper towel. Let's see. You're cut off, says Jonathan. Do you like 1800 tequila, Carrie? Jeff, there is not a tequila that I don't love. The problem with tequila for me, and I've talked to you guys about this in the past, is that I grow horns and I get very mischievous, and tequila makes me want to not so much commit a felony, but definitely like a misdemeanor. And I need to be supervised when I drink tequila. My husband... maybe someday I will share the story about when he and I were dating, and I went down to Florida to meet him while he was in a school for the military, and we were only dating a few months, and he did not believe me when I told him about how mischievous I got drinking tequila, and he took me out drinking margaritas one night to test my theory, and let's just say that night lives in infamy, and maybe one of the reasons why he married me, I don't know, but yeah, we start measuring our ears. That was with my husband, but in a different place. But yes, that's another story for anybody new to the War Room that will live in War Room history, that I admitted that while I was in Romania visiting my now husband, we got drunk in a bar in Bucharest, and I measured my ears because I told him that my ears were above average, and he didn't think they were, and we measured them, and they in fact are larger than average. Don't get me going on the whole measuring the ears thing. But yeah, thanks, Eric, for bringing that back up again. Let's see. Tequila makes my daughter break out in handcuffs, says Ellen. Yeah, exactly. Tequila is one of those things that I think, there are people that say, oh, I don't drink brown liquor because it makes me want to fight. Some people say wine makes them sleepy. It really is kind of interesting what different alcohols do to people. And I don't know if it's the placebo effect. I don't know, but it definitely makes me mischievous, to say the least. So check out those two podcasts on mistresscarrie.com. They're in the blog section. The Breaking the Ice podcast, it's a video too, actually. And the Crazy Radio Stories podcast is just audio, and it's only like 10 minutes long. So you can check that out. I'm very excited that the War Room looks and sounds good because of the 150th anniversary party that is coming up. So that's why I had to get some new equipment because there's a lot going on. So the first thing I want to do is talk about our big 150th episode party. We're having it at the boat in Drake-It, and it's coming up in 2 weeks. It's kind of insane that we're only 2 weeks out, but it's happening Tuesday night, September 21st. It's happening at the boat in Drake-It. Mike Shue is going to be my co-host. So, that's always a good time. He's been on Cocktails in the War Room multiple times now. Cannot wait. The aforementioned Josh Dolan from the Breaking the Ice podcast is going to be doing stand-up that night. And we talked about it actually on the Breaking the Ice podcast because he hasn't done stand-up in a while. So it's going to be awesome. And it is going to be the live debut of the Shadows of Boston. They're a Celtic punk band. Scruffy Wallace, formerly of the Dropkick Murphys. This is his new band. They just released their first EP, and they've been on the podcast before. I think they were maybe episode 19. I'm trying to remember what episode they were, but I believe it was episode 19. Talking all about the bagpipes, talking about their military service, because there's many veterans in the band. And they wanted to play live. And I said, you know what? Why don't you guys do it for the 150th episode of Cocktails in the War Room? We are also, speaking of my guys from Afghanistan, going to have a whiskey tasting from the Regimental Spirit Company and Regimental Whiskey. And that is veteran owned and run and started by one of the guys I was in Afghanistan with. And they are going to be sampling a new cocktail called the Mistress Manhattan with the Regimental Whiskey. So that is all happening at the boat. Tickets are available now, and they're only $10. There's an Eventbrite link right on the events calendar at mistresscarrie.com. So just go to the events calendar, September 21st, open it up. There's an Eventbrite link right there, and you need to get your tickets. There's also going to be an acoustic duo. There's a full restaurant worth of food. Doors open at 6:00, and it's going to be an absolute blast. Mark says, just got my ticket tonight. Can't wait. Super excited. Cannot wait to see you guys. Last time that we were at the boat, it was for our 1-year anniversary, and they could only be at half capacity. Everybody had to be socially distanced. We all had to wear masks. There was no live music allowed. So, even though things are still crazy, obviously we all want to be really careful. I'm going to ask anybody that is not vaccinated, please wear your mask. Please be careful. We really just want to make this night a blast for everybody. And I can't wait to see the band. I can't wait to hang out with Josh. I can't wait to see him do stand-up again. I love being able to hang out with Mike Shue, and having him co-host Cocktails in the War Room is always an absolute blast. But you guys got to get your tickets because I think by the time the show comes around, it's going to be sold out. So get your tickets. They're only $10. And part of the reason I explain this to everybody with Mistress Carrie Backstage Passes, part of the reason for not having it be a free event is that I wanted to be able to pay Josh Dolan for doing stand-up, and I wanted to be able to pay the band. I think it's really important for people that are in the entertainment business that have been hit so hard because of COVID, that I want to make sure that we're supporting the boat, who is a local venue that's bringing in live music. And I want to be able to make sure that, just like with the Cocktails in the War Room t-shirts, that we are doing our best to support the industries as well and local businesses. And so that's why we just decided, you know what, we're just going to sell the tickets for $10, and that way we're going to be able to pay everybody. And I'm really excited to be able to do that, because these are all people that would have done things for me as favors. And when I started my company and started the podcast and kind of took my step away from WAF, I always had it in my head that if I were going to start a company and if I were going to start doing these kinds of things, that we were going to do it the right way, and that it wasn't just going to be built off of collecting favors from people that I had worked with and helped throughout my radio career at WAF, that I wanted to be able to do the right thing for everyone. And that means using as many local businesses as I can. That means having as much of my merch be made in the United States as it can be, having as many things veteran owned and operated as possible. And you guys have been so supportive of that, I just really appreciate that. So somebody said, can we donate $10 even if we can't make it? You know what, Christina, you could buy a ticket and then give it to somebody in the war room if you wanted to. Because obviously we don't want a bunch of people buying tickets and then not showing up, because then we won't have a crowded place. But I believe I'm working on some raffle prizes right now. And so we're trying to possibly come up with a charity benefiting raffle that night at the bar as well. And so there are going to be ways for you to make donations and stuff. But Shannon says, sorry I'm late. What I missed? You missed Wednesday. You missed the sound check. We're trying out some new equipment tonight, Shannon, because we needed to be able to bring in more microphones for the 150th episode of the War Room that we're going to celebrate in a couple of weeks. And any chance we could get the poster? You know what? I did not print the posters because I didn't think anybody would want them, actually, but I don't know. Maybe I'll look into printing some so that you guys can get them signed by the band and everybody. That would be kind of cool, actually. So let me look into it and see if I can get them printed, because that would be awesome. And I'm just super grateful for everybody, that the Shadows of Boston guys picked this to be their first ever live gig. And they know they're among friends. So if anything gets screwed up, they don't got to worry too much about it. And I'm super grateful that the boat is welcoming us back once again. And I'm hoping that as things hopefully recover later this year and in 2022, hopefully, that we're going to be able to start doing more of this kind of stuff. And so you guys supporting the events the way that you have been is just going to make it possible for us to do more awesome stuff. So I'm really excited about it. So that's coming up in a couple of weeks. There's tons of other stuff to talk about, though. The first thing I want to talk about is Saturday, obviously. It's shocking to me that Saturday is the 20th anniversary of September 11th, which really blows my mind. I read an article, I think it was in the New York Post actually, that said there are over 6,000 children that lost a parent on 9/11. And there was a massive list of FDNY firefighters that are children of fallen firefighters from 9/11 and Ground Zero. And as these things, I just watched another video, I think it was on people.com. A kid was born 6 days after 9/11 when his dad was killed. And he has a fear of elevators, grown up with a fear of elevators, obviously, hearing everything that had happened on 9/11 and how his dad died. And he tried to get over his fear of elevators by going up to the observation deck at One World Trade Center. And that was a really touching video. And there's just a lot going on over this anniversary weekend. There's going to be a lot of documentaries. And for people that are a little bit younger that may remember 9/11 because they were watching it in school, or it's going to bring up a lot for first responders. I think anybody that's of a certain age just is going to remember where they were and remember what those weeks were like. And especially now that all of the troops are home from Afghanistan and everything that's happened, it's bringing up a lot. So I wanted to share a few pictures with you guys. These pictures are from 2006. This is where I was on the 5th anniversary of 9/11. I was in Baghdad. The picture that you see with me, with all of the guys in uniform and me sitting on the guy's lap, I had visited a place outside of the Baghdad International Airport, or what they called Bayat. That was a place called Camp Cropper, which after they closed Abu Ghraib prison, after all of the scandals and the controversy that happened at Abu Ghraib, they opened Camp Cropper, and that's where they had a lot of the high value prisoners there. And those were all troops from Massachusetts, and they were working 12 hours on, 12 hours off, guarding these insurgents that had been arrested and were being held at Camp Cropper. And these guys really didn't get to do a lot. And so one of the things that they asked me to do, and they had to get special clearance for me to go in there and visit these guys, is that they sent out for all of these steaks and like giant salads. And they wanted to have a barbecue with these guys and have me go there and spend the day with them, because these guys didn't get to go to the PX and to a lot of the USO shows because their compound was so locked down, and these guys were working 12 hours on, 12 hours off, really working with really dangerous, scary people. And so that's how I spent the day of September 11th, 2006, was visiting these guys at Camp Cropper. And it was a really powerful day for me to sit down. We were recording interviews that day. I used the satellite phone to call into WAF, and I was able to connect some of these soldiers with their loved ones live on the air, because you got to remember, back in 2006, technology and Wi-Fi and all that wasn't what it is now. And you can imagine what it was like in Iraq at the time. And so having that satellite phone to be able to connect these guys with their families through the radio station, and it took a lot of coordination. That was a really powerful day. You know, Mark says I was a sophomore in high school. I mean, it's crazy. So that was how I spent the day. Now, it had just so happened that, and you'll see that picture down on the bottom over here, that the guys from Drowning Pool were on a USO tour. And I had bumped into them when I had arrived in Kuwait before I had made my way into Iraq, and bumped into them on a base called Camp Buehring, which is where a lot of U.S. troops acclimated in Kuwait before they made their way into wherever they were going in Iraq. And it was a fairly big base, and it was a lot of support there. There were a lot of Black Hawk flights that came in and out of Camp Buehring. And Drowning Pool was on a USO tour, and they were playing a show at Camp Buehring. And I happened to be walking across the base. I spent 18 hours at Camp Buehring, and I heard about the USO tour, and I went to where they had the stage set up, and I bumped into the Drowning Pool guys. And they were like, "Mistress Carrie, what are you doing here?" Because they had no idea that I was there. And when I found out that they were playing a concert on the 5th anniversary of 9/11 in Baghdad, and found out that I was going to be there, I said, "Hey, guys, I want to come to your show." And they were like, "Will you introduce us?" And I was like, "Yes, absolutely." So that top picture is me on stage the night of the 5th anniversary of 9/11 in front of thousands of U.S. troops at a USO show introducing Drowning Pool. It is one of the craziest mosh pits I've ever seen. It was such an emotional day. It was the first big kind of monumental anniversary in commemoration of 9/11. There was a lot of feelings. And to have the band there to blow off steam for our troops, the place just went crazy. If you look up on YouTube, if you look up Drowning Pool, Baghdad, September 11th, 2006, there's not a ton, because like I said, like, people didn't have the cell phones with the camera phones and all the memory and everything we have now, but you will be able to find some of the video. There were guys crowd surfing with rifles. They were shooting bullets in the air. It's one of the craziest concerts I've ever been to. That bottom picture is some of the guys that were my security guards when I was in Baghdad. And the guys from Drowning Pool, they were up till like 2:30 in the morning after the concert. They autographed every single thing that the soldiers waited in line for hours to meet the band. And the guys from Drowning Pool said, "We are not leaving until we meet every single one of you." And they didn't. And so when I talk about artists like Three Doors Down, like Shine Down, like so many artists, Five Finger Death Punch, that have gone on these USO tours, it means so much to our troops. But when I tell you that it means so much to the artists as well, I'm not kidding. They were so humbled that the troops were like, thank you guys for being here. And the guys in the band were like, no, thank you for everything that you're doing. And it was really special to see the reception of the band to the troops, and then the way that the band reacted to our soldiers as well. And that was one of the best things that I've ever done. And I went up on stage. Now, you got to remember, back in 2006, radio streaming was happening, but it wasn't the way that it is now. And social media was there, but it wasn't the way that it is now. So there were a lot of people in the crowd that weren't from Massachusetts, that weren't from New England, that had no idea who I was. And the guys from Drowning Pool were like, you go up there and get them riled up. And so I went out there and I asked where all of the people from New England were. And then I asked where all the people from New York were. And I got all the people from New England to chant Yankees suck. And that got them riled up. Trust me. And it was amazing. And I love that picture. This is why, you bring a producer with you, because my producer, Joe, we call him Combat Joe now, went up on the stage and took this picture. And it's one of my most cherished photographs from my trip to Iraq, because you can see just how many of our troops were there. And this is just a fraction of the troops that were even allowed to go to the concert. And there were thousands of them there. As a side note, over the weekend, I reached out to Joe, who is still in radio. He left the company after we got home from Iraq, and he has a big corporate job in New York now. And I reached out to him because there's so much talk about the anniversary of 9/11. And I did the podcast episode with producer Mike from Afghanistan, but I had not done one with Combat Joe yet. And I reached out to Joe over the weekend and I said, look, happy Iraq anniversary, because the Friday of Labor Day weekend is when we actually got on the plane and flew to Iraq. And I said, would you be interested in coming on the podcast so that we could talk about Iraq 15 years later? And he said, absolutely. So that is going to be an episode that's coming up on the podcast as well, which I can't wait to record, because Joe and I don't get to see each other all that often. We don't get to hang out because obviously he's in New York. And unfortunately for us, the only time we've seen each other recently has been funerals. And for anybody that, has done anything with the military, any of our veterans, the last thing you want to do is to have reunions at funerals. And veterans, unfortunately, more and more all the time, that's what's happening. So if you are a veteran here joining us in the war room, first of all, thank you. And second of all, especially with what's going on in the news right now, and especially with the anniversary of 9/11 coming up, don't make funerals be the only time that you get in touch with your guys. Get on FaceTime, put a FaceTime or a Zoom group together. Do what you can to try and get together with each other. Text them randomly, phone calls. You guys got to stick together. And it's more and more evident all the time. And we're coming up on Suicide Prevention Week, and there's just no reason to not be in touch with people that you share such a special bond with. And that's how I feel about Joe and producer Mike, because they're the only ones that really understand what those trips were like. And we went on these emotional journeys together. And I know that I can speak for Mike, and I know that I can speak for Joe when I say these trips were life-changing for us. They changed everything. And that's something that you don't change back from that. So I wanted to show you guys, these are pictures of where I was on September 11th, 2006. This is where I was on September 11th, 2011. This was the 10-year anniversary memorial service that took place on Camp Phoenix during the day on September 11th. That bottom picture, that memorial, is something that they had set up outside of the base fire station, Camp Phoenix, where Mike and I, that was like our base camp. That is where we spent our nights, where we slept at night, and also kind of where we staged everything. We ate a lot of meals there, and then we would go out on missions with the guys during the day, sometimes at night, but mostly during the day. if you look at that picture of the memorial service with all of the flags at half staff, and you look way over here, you see those picnic tables? They're blue and yellow. They were built out of plywood, and they were the picnic tables that's outside the chow hall. The flags are right out inside of the chow hall, and that is what they called Patriot Square. And that last picnic table that is kind of cut off in the photo is where we used to work at night. There was Wi-Fi in Patriot Square, and in the middle of the night, which we were operating on Boston time still, we did a lot of work out there at night because the Wi-Fi was the fastest. And so we were able to upload photographs and blog posts and all of that kind of stuff late at night. And we spent a lot of time in Patriot Square, and there were all of these memorials, these granite etched squares that were put in front of all of those flagpoles. Now, I don't know if this base exists anymore. It was a massive base, and one of the things they had was a fuel depot, which warranted having their own fire department because there was a lot of fuel on the base. There was also a firing range for the special operations guys. That's where QRF was. There were a lot of barracks there. All of those flagpoles are representing countries that had troops in Afghanistan based on that base. So all of our allies were there, obviously. The Bruins had just won the Stanley Cup, and so you can see the Canadian flag flying proudly there. There was a lot of ball busting that took place during that trip because the Canadians were very well represented on the base then. One of the things that they invited me to do, which is the picture above the cocktails and the War Room logo, is they had a flagpole outside of the commander's office, and you could go and fly a flag there. And so they let me fly a flag in Afghanistan on the 10th anniversary of 9/11. And that flag is now mounted and hung up on the wall here in the War Room. And I kept it, and that was the guys helping me to make sure it was folded properly. And that was a true honor for me to be able to know that, just for a moment, that a flag that I have flew in Afghanistan. And with everything going on in Afghanistan right now, it's something that I just know wouldn't be possible now and could never happen again. And going through these pictures of Afghanistan and seeing that this was literally 10 years ago and how different things are, it's just crazy. So these are just some of the memories that are going to be coming up for me on Saturday. Obviously, there's the actual day that it happened and remembering that I was in the AAF studio. I don't have any pictures from that day because it wasn't our instinct in that moment to take pictures and kind of commemorate what was happening. At the time, we were just kind of running around trying to do our jobs. And it didn't even dawn on me to be like, we need to take a picture because this is going to be something that we're going to be talking about. I mean, you knew it was changing the world, right? 9/11, you knew in that moment that life was different. You knew that war was coming. It was a very strange time, but the only thing that we did do was we always remembered to record. And back then we were recording our shows on cassette. And so we did the best that we could to document this for posterity's sake on cassettes, but videotaping things in the studio and taking photos, like it didn't even cross my mind to do that. So sorry, Duncan, your coaster just hit the ground again. There's a lot of humidity coming off my glass. So I don't have any pictures from that day. But it's kind of crazy that now we're coming up on the 20th anniversary. And it just, all I can think about is the day that it happened in the AAF studio. And I think about this day. And I think about that day. And those are the memories that are just so ingrained in my brain. This Saturday, I'm going to see Seven Dust, which is Saturday night, actually, which is kind of random and strange, but I'm getting together with producer Mike, And I believe Mike Shue is going to be there, and a bunch of us are just going to go. And it just seemed like a good place for us to gather. And I'll tell you more about what's going on at the Seven Dust Show coming up. So I wanted to share some of these pictures. Now, I will tell you, and it's packed away, and I meant to pull it out tonight, and I didn't. Shortly after 9/11, someone, you got to remember, for anybody that doesn't quite remember that was younger, everybody wanted to hang American flags after 9/11. And American flags became very hard to find. And someone had dropped off an American flag in the AAF studio, and we hung it in the window that overlooked the Mass Pike in the studio. And it stayed there until we moved studios back at the end of 2018. And when we moved into the new studios on Leo M. Birmingham, I took the flag out of the AAF studio and then I hung it in the window in my office because I didn't want anything to happen to that flag that we had hung on 9/11 in the AAF studio. And when AAF went off the air, I took that flag out of my office and I packed it up, and it's in a box with all of the stuff from my old WAF office. And I meant to dig it out tonight. I'll try to bring it next week because it's all faded, because it hung in the window of the AAF studio on the east side of the building facing the Mass Pike for 17 years. But I have the flag that hung in the AAF studio and that we put up on 9/11 and never took down again. And that is a cherished thing for me as well. So I know this is going to be a rough week for a lot of people. And I'm not just talking about our military personnel, but I'm talking about our first responders. I'm talking about people that had little kids. I'm talking about families and loved ones of people that were on those planes and that worked at the Pentagon. And for young people, I realize that as time passes, generations will look upon 9/11 through history's lens, the way that I grew up looking at Pearl Harbor through history's lens as something that happened during my grandparents' era. But for the people that lived through it, like our grandparents' generation, 9/11 is still very raw for a lot of people, even though it was 20 years ago. And there's just a lot of memories that are going to come up, and there's going to be a lot of stuff on the news, and there's going to be a lot of documentaries and a lot of the footage. Unlike Pearl Harbor, there was only some black and white film news footage of the attack, but 9/11, there's camera phone footage and video footage and so many photographs and live news footage, and that brings a lot of those memories back for people. And you know, just the footage, I wince every time I see the footage of the second plane hitting, because by that time the first plane had hit and people had started taking photos of the towers. And yeah, I mean, Fred says I was working at the Boston Globe at the time and I never heard a building as quiet as that moment. Yeah, it's going to bring up a lot for people. And so I would just encourage you to commemorate the occasion and the anniversary the way that you need to. And to also just be cognizant of the fact that other people are going to have to commemorate it the way that they need to. There's going to be people that don't want to talk about it, that don't want to pick up the phone that day, that don't want to post about it, that aren't going to go on social media because they're not going to want to be barraged with the memories of it. And then there are going to be people that do need to talk about it. And so, you know, however it is that you need to process, like Bish says, I'm running 3.43 miles in honor of the fallen firefighters on Saturday. That's amazing. However you are going to commemorate this, that's how you need to do it. Jeff, you said my daughter was one what? Pilot on the first was also from Drake-It. Yeah, I mean, there's so many local people that were on those planes from Boston. Have you guys been to the 9/11 memorial at Logan Airport? That's there. There are a lot of memorials that are obviously going to be having remembrances over the weekend as well. There are a lot of places that have memorials built out of ground zero steel. And I will also remind you guys about the musical, which I know sounds so ridiculous, and I really need you guys to trust me on this because it really changed my perspective on 9/11. There are artistic grants that are given in Canada. And years ago, a grant was given to two playwrights, and they wanted to commemorate the story of Gander, Newfoundland. And for anyone that does not know this, please look up the story of the people of Gander, Newfoundland. There is an old World War II era airstrip in Gander, Newfoundland, which is the easternmost point of North America. And they built that because at the time, planes could barely be transatlantic for fuel. And so they built this airstrip in Gander, Newfoundland, so that planes flying from Europe, from the westernmost point of Europe, could barely make it across the Atlantic and would stop in Gander for fuel. And you got to remember all of the flights that were in the air that day. And when they weren't aware of how many planes had been hijacked. The thought was every plane could be hijacked. We didn't know. There was so much uncertainty. And so they grounded every flight immediately, regardless of where they were supposed to be going on their final destination. They ordered the planes to land. And it's one of the things I will never forget, looking out over the Mass Pike in the AAF studio, and there were just dozens of these jumbo jets circling, burning off all their fuel. And they were landing one by one, but no planes were taking off, and the fighter jets going by. Well, the flights that were coming to North America, especially to the United States from Europe, were not being allowed into American airspace because they didn't know if there were terrorists on those planes and if those planes had been hijacked. And there needed to be a place for them to go. They had crossed so much of the Atlantic, they couldn't cross back. And so the decision was made to land, I believe it was something like 36 jumbo jets on this airstrip in Gander, Newfoundland. And Gander's population is like 5,000. And that day on September 11th, the population of Gander, Newfoundland more than doubled because all of those giant jumbo jets were forced to land in Gander, Newfoundland in this village unexpectedly. And you got to remember that the people that were coming to the United States that landed in Gander, Newfoundland were not just Americans. These were people that had American visas that are now landing in Canada. These are people that do not speak English, that do not understand what's going on because the people in the flights didn't have access to the news to know what was going on in the United States with the flights. And imagine how scared you would be if you were coming from a foreign country and not speaking the language, and all of a sudden you're landing in another country that you're not supposed to, and the police and the military are boarding your flight. And that's what happened in Gander, Newfoundland. I bring it up because this musical is called Come From Away. There's a documentary about it, and I would encourage you, as you're watching a lot of these commemorations this weekend, to watch the documentary about the people of Gander, Newfoundland. They realized really quickly what was going on. Obviously, the people in Gander knew what was going on 9/11, and they snapped into action, and they came up with a plan, and they opened shelters at the schools, and they welcomed strangers into their homes, and they gutted their stores for donations and supplies, and they fed, clothed, and housed refugees, basically. I mean, they were people without a home. There was very little telecommunications. Very few people had cell phones. Computers were incredibly slow. And all of a sudden, thousands of people from around the world found themselves in this little town in Gander, Newfoundland. And these playwrights in Canada applied for a grant to be able to write a musical to tell the story of the people of Gander. And I remember being on the air years ago when I read this story, and I was like, they're fucking making a musical about 9/11? And I thought it was the most disrespectful, most idiotic thing I had ever heard in my life. Then I interviewed the people from the town and the director. And then I went and saw the musical. And it completely changed 9/11 for me. And so while 90% of my recollection of 9/11 is either going to be these memories of Afghanistan or these memories of Iraq or the memories of that day in the AAF studio, There is part of me now that thinks about the people in Gander, Newfoundland, because their humanity and generosity that they showed thousands of perfect strangers that arrived on their shores was something that just completely reminded me that not everyone sucks. And if you go to the 9/11 Museum, which I have not been able to do yet, there is a whole display in the 9/11 Museum in New York about the people of Gander, Newfoundland. And the musical is on Broadway, and the shows begin again on September 21st when Broadway opens back up in New York. I have not seen it on Broadway. I saw it when the tour came to Boston, and I went with my mom and my sister, and it was spectacular. Isn't even a word that aptly describes how good the musical is. Now, I know if you're a guy especially and you're like, oh, musicals or whatever, it's funny, it's heartwarming, it's tragic, it's sad. It will renew your faith in humanity. And the documentary, which I am assuming you are going to have access to this weekend because of the anniversary of 9/11, even if you have to pay for it on pay-per-view, just please watch it. The people of Gander, Newfoundland and the surrounding towns, they literally opened up their homes and took in these people and cooked for them and welcomed these people back. And there were people that got stranded together that ended up divorced because of it, and people that were strangers there that ended up married because of it, and people that have gone back and gotten married in Gander because they fell in love there. And it's just this amazing story. And so I wanted to make sure that I brought it to your attention. It's called Come From Away, which is a Gander slang because it's kind of a hard place to get to. And that airstrip really didn't do very much. And so they call people that have come from outside of Newfoundland, come from aways. That's their slang term for out of towners. They call them come from aways. And it's a really spectacular story, and it's part of the 9/11 story. And it's one of the only, you hear the stories of heroism of people that were saved, of people who slept through their alarm clock and didn't end up going to work. There's a story of somebody whose kid was sick, and so they had to call in sick to work that day because they had to stay home with their kid, and then they didn't end up dying in the towers. But this is one of those stories that I hope that you guys will do some research on, because it will give you a little hope when it gets dark this weekend. It was a Broadway show, Come From Away. That's what I'm talking about, Penny. I saw the touring version of the Broadway show, but the Broadway show opens back up again this month. But they also made a documentary about the people that wrote the musical and about them getting it made, and also about the people that are portrayed in the musical as well, the police chief and all of the people from the town and some of the passengers as well. And it's just spectacular. So if you're looking for something to try and lighten your spirits a little bit on a very dark topic like 9/11, obviously this weekend, try and find the documentary that is about the Come From Away musical and the people of Gander, Newfoundland. And if you ever go to New York, or if the tour ever comes back to Boston, you need to see this musical. It is flawless. It's beautiful. It's amazing. All right, we got a lot to talk about. I've been bending your ear enough already. So let's talk about last week's episode of the podcast, which featured one of my favorite people of all time, Brent Smith from Shinedown, episode 65 of the Mistress Carrie podcast. We got to catch up with Brent to find out about the progress of the upcoming 7th Shinedown record, which he told us in the podcast is not called Shinedown 7, but he wouldn't tell me what the title is going to be. But that's how they've been referring to the album, because it's their 7th studio album. And also the film Attention, Attention came out on video on demand and streaming services on Friday night based off of their 2018 album, Attention, Attention, which is their 6th album. So now they're getting ready to launch their 7th record. And it's just always great to reconnect with Brent. I love him. He's just always so gracious and wonderful. And he really does have this positive outlook on the world and life, and even in the craziest times. And you can go back and listen to episode 1 of the Mistress Carrie podcast, because he was my first guest. That was in June when things were really crazy last summer. and really locked down and scary, and his positivity and his outlook on things and trying to unite people and keep them together is just part of who he is. And so it was awesome to have him back on the podcast. And, if you guys saw the film, what did you guys think? It's really an interesting concept. It's only a little over an hour long. It's not a full length feature film, which we talked about in the episode, which is normally like 90 minutes minimum or whatever. But Penny said, I loved when he talked about Chris Cornell. It was very heartfelt. I have started asking all of the artists and songwriters the songwriting question that has really become one of my favorite parts of the podcast episodes. And hearing him break down Soundgarden and hearing him talk about Chris Cornell and hearing him just talk about the songwriting style and the inspiration, and it was really heartfelt, but it was also kind of insight into the role that a producer can have, trying to get something out of a creative genius like Chris Cornell and having him listen to a bunch of Frank Sinatra records because he wanted him to have this this kind of crooner inspiration. If you haven't listened to the episode yet, it's a really powerful part of the interview. And Brent really went into detail about it. And I love that about this episode is I just love hearing artists talk about their love of other artists. And I love hearing them talk about their inspiration because music is something. I look at it, especially rock and roll, as being like those relay races in the Olympics where they're handing the baton off to each other. And hearing artists talk about their inspiration and saying, you know what? Yes, like that person made me want to start playing drums. That person made me want to start songwriting. That person made me want to pick up a guitar. That's the evolution of rock and roll. And so when you hear these artists talk about what it is that inspired them, I just find it so fascinating. And so, yeah, I loved hearing him talk about Chris Cornell. Penny, I just couldn't agree more. What's the story of Brent saying to put your bra on right from the podcast intro? Okay, so way back in the day when Shinedown was not as big as they are now and they were coming up on the show a lot, they would come on the show and we would always get into their accents, right? And it was always something that whenever I had bands come into the studio that had very recognizable accents, whether it be Dimebag Darrell and Vinnie Paul or whoever that had really strong Seven Dust guys, all those guys that had really strong Southern accents, I would always try to teach them how to talk like a Bostonian. And the guys from Shinedown in that interview where that audio came from, we're talking about how they thought it was so funny that Bostonians put R's in things that they don't belong, like pizza. And they were laughing because they heard somebody at one of the shows talking about how a girl had to put her bra on. And like there was an R at the end. And so when I asked Brent to record audio for me, he recorded it that way because we had been talking about the Boston accent and they had been trying the Boston accent themselves. And he was like, oh, put your bra on, Carrie. And so that's where that audio comes from. Thanks for the question. Influenced is evolution, and creativity. Yeah, side note, the government needs a changeover. Accents. So many songs have saved me in so many ways, says Shannon. My wife yells at me for the same thing, and I'm from Rhode Island. Yeah, so that's where that kind of inside joke came from. And when it came time to put the audio intro together for the podcast, I couldn't not put that in there because it's just too funny. It's hilarious. So, it's just one of those little funny memories or whatever. But it was great to have Brent back on the podcast. And if you haven't listened to it yet, obviously it's available everywhere and we'll go over some of the places. But I do want to announce who's on this week's podcast because it's awesome. Episode 66 of the Mistress Carrie podcast is Miles Kennedy, who is an amazing singer and songwriter. He's got his new solo record out called The Ides of March. He is also the lead singer in Alter Bridge, and he is also Slash's lead singer from Slash, featuring Miles Kennedy and the Conspirators. That's the long name of the band. But Miles is an amazing guy. Now, I will tell you this about Miles. He comes to town a lot with Alter Bridge, with Slash, and there have been many occasions that I have requested interviews from Miles. And, you know, you request an interview with Alter Bridge and Miles doesn't come. And I had always kind of wondered why. And everybody I know that knows Miles, whether it be, you know, the Seven Dust guys, Mark Tremonti, like anybody that's ever played a gig with him or played shows with him or toured with him or whatever, just talks about what an amazing guy, how approachable and friendly and wonderful he is. But I had never interviewed him. And I couldn't figure out why he didn't accept the invitations. And we talked about why in this episode, actually. I don't want to give too much away, but I totally understand it now. And we talked about it in the episode. You know, it's not that he doesn't like to do interviews. It's not that he's not friendly, but there's definitely a real logistical reason why he doesn't do it. And you will hear all about it in this week's episode. We talked about everything. We talked about our dogs. He's been married for 18 years, I think. And so he gave me some marriage advice, which I love. I love asking people for marriage advice that have been married for a long time in rock and roll. Alice Cooper, Dee Snider, people that have been married for decades, which is near impossible because it's rock and roll and it just doesn't help marriages very often. We talked about being in a band with Slash and being a guitar player in a band with Slash. And, you know, talked about guys like Mark Tremonti. I told him a story about what one of the Alter Bridge songs means to me, which I don't want to tell that story, but we can talk about it next week in the podcast. But he's just an amazing guy. I think you're going to love him if you don't already. The playlist is fantastic. So there's obviously a lot of his solo stuff in there. There's a lot of the Slash stuff in there. Do you guys remember the movie Rockstar? You may or may not know this, but remember the Mark Wahlberg movie with Jennifer Aniston that's kind of based off of Ripper Owens from Judas Priest kind of story, and how at the end of the movie, spoiler alert, Mark Wahlberg quits the band and gives the microphone to a fan in the audience. The fan in the audience that ends up taking the job at the end of Rockstar is Miles Kennedy, which you may or may not know. So, if you have never heard an interview with Miles, I think you're going to love him. And if you love his music, the interview was just going to make you love him more because he was so gracious and wonderful and friendly and approachable. And I just think he's awesome. So I'm psyched this week. This week's episode sponsored by Digital Federal Credit Union, and who you can find at dcu.org. And it's also brought to you by Jag in Detroit Podcast. Now, if you are looking to start a podcast, either for yourself as a hobby, or if you are a business that would really like to have a podcast as a marketing tool for your company, but you just don't know where to start, Jag in Detroit Podcasts, that's what they do. They produce podcasts for other people, and they are incredibly knowledgeable. John, who's Jag, was very helpful with me and has always kind of been there to kind of give me advice when it comes to microphones, editing software, what kind of equipment I should get, helping to get my podcast launched. Like, he was just somebody that is an expert. He worked in radio for a long time and then years ago got into podcasting before a lot of other people. And this is his business. And so if you have questions about podcasting, if you were looking for somebody to steer you, this is what he does for a living. And he's sponsoring the Mistress Carrie podcast. So you rock, Jag. So that's episode 66. It goes live at midnight tonight. Now, if you subscribe to the Mistress Carrie podcast, a reminder that you also get the Sit Rep, which is all of your rock news, music headlines, and entertainment updates and info. And you get it in less than 5 minutes. And so if you subscribe to the podcast, you get the Sit Reps every Monday through Friday. They upload it like 3 a.m. So no matter how early you get up to go to work, it's there for you. And it's basically just the headlines of everything that's going on in music and entertainment. So you are up to date with everything that's going on. And then you can go about your day. And the Sit Rep, I'm really seeing is like finding an audience now because people know that it's not a huge commitment and you can get caught up on stuff. And the show notes of the Sit Rep have the links to the news stories so that if you do want more information about that story that you heard me talking about, you can go into the show notes of the podcast episode for the Sit Rep and you can find it. The same way that when you go into the full length episodes of the podcast, in the show notes are all of the links to find this week, Myles Kennedy, to find Slash, to find Alter Bridge, just to find everything. All of my links are in there. And then there's always a corresponding playlist with all of the music that we talked about in that episode. So this playlist is going to feature all of that music and more. So you always want to look at the show notes as well. Here are just some of the outlets where you can find the Mistress Carrie podcast. There's a ton of them. Just search the Mistress Carrie podcast. As long as you find that artwork, then you know you're in the right spot. And don't forget to hit subscribe so that you get the episodes automatically. And we are still holding strong at 114 countries right now. And our neighbors to the north, Canada, are the number 2 country besides the United States listening to the Mistress Carrie podcast. So I want to make sure that I'm saying what's up to all the Canadians out there. And by the way, wait till you hear the story about where Myles Kennedy's from. I don't want to talk about it too much, but wait till you hear him talking about it. We solved a little bit of a mystery in Myles's life, and it all happens on this week's episode of the podcast. All right, let's talk about some music headlines because we got a lot going on. Motorhead's graphic novel is coming out on, it came out today. Duh. Motorhead's graphic novel is out today, which tells the story of Lemmy growing up all the way through the recording and the release of Ace of Spades. The Led Zeppelin documentary made its premiere at the Venice Film Festival over the weekend. Jimmy Page was there to intro it. The trailer is out. The official release date has not been announced yet, but the trailer for the new Becoming Led Zeppelin authorized documentary is out, and you can find it on YouTube. They announced that the new Matrix film is called The Matrix Resurrections, and it's being released on December 22nd. It's going to be available in theaters and on HBO Max on the same day. And they did release some still images from the new Matrix film, which I can't wait just because my future ex-husband Keanu Reeves is in it. He's wonderful. New releases to this Friday. New releases include the new album from Andrew WK. Metallica's reissue of the Black Album comes out this Friday, as does the compilation project, The Blacklist, with all of the Metallica covers from the Black Album. And that album is, all the proceeds go to charity. Metallica also announced they're going to be the live guest on Jimmy Kimmel Live this Friday night to commemorate the release of the Black Album reissue and also the Blacklist. And don't forget Brian Johnson's autobiography, The Lives of Brian, comes out next month on October 26th. Daughtry's new album, Dearly Beloved, comes out next Friday. He talked a lot about it on his episode of the Mistress Carrie podcast. Also coming out next month, Tom Morello's album, The Atlas Underground Fire, with guest appearances from Chris Stapleton and Eddie Vedder and Bruce Springsteen. Bad Wolves announced today their new album, Dear Monsters, is coming out on October 29th. And there's a lot going on with Bad Wolves right now. DL, their new lead singer, has taken over singing for the band. Obviously, the lawsuits that have been filed by former lead singer Tommy Vext and the band's manager and the remaining members of the band. There's a lot of drama. There's a lot going on with the guys from Bad Wolves, but we knew that they've been working on new music, and they announced that it's coming out October 29th, and it's called Dear Monsters. The new 6 a.m. album hits, And also Nikki Sixx's new book called The First 21 are coming out in October as well. And don't forget, Trans-Siberian Orchestra released all of their tour dates for North America around the holidays. They're going to be at the DCU Center on November 27th, and those tickets go on sale next Friday. So I want to remind you about that. And speaking of tickets, Jeff Tate is performing the entire Queensryche Empire album and Rage for Order album on this solo tour that he's doing. And he is playing at Rascals tomorrow night. Seven Dust and Tremonti, we talked about, they are playing Saturday night at the Palladium. And Mass Concerts has announced that if you are a first responder, if you are a police officer, a firefighter, or an EMT, you are going to get into that show for free, which I thought was really cool. So that's happening on Saturday night at the Palladium, Seven Dust and Tremonti. And if you are a police officer, a firefighter, or an EMT, you're going to get into that show for free. And don't forget, next Wednesday, the Black Crowes and Dirty Honey are playing at the Xfinity Center, and it's the 30th anniversary of the Black Crowes album, Shake Your Moneymaker. And if you're going to the show, get there early. Do not miss Dirty Honey. They are awesome. And that show's happening next Wednesday, and there are still tickets available. I also want to remind you guys about the Megadeth Unplugged in Boston album that was recorded on May 9th in 2001, which blows my mind having the conversation we had about 9/11 earlier tonight. The world was so different when this Megadeth album got recorded because it was before 9/11. It is impossible to overstate how much the world changed on September 11th, 2001. And so I look at anything that happened in 2001 before 9/11, and it's like it was in an alternate universe. But they released the album. It's available for streaming. You can hear it on Spotify, Pandora, everywhere. But you're going to hear me during the intro of Symphony of Destruction because it was an AAF show. And they played acoustic for us, which they did not do very often, if at all. So if you haven't heard it yet, I just want to make sure you check it out. All right. I want to remind you guys about the Boston Wounded Vet Run, which is coming up in a couple weeks. It's happening Sunday, September 19th. It leaves out of Boston Harley. It's headed to Anthony's of Malden. There's going to be a big Mistress Carrie booth there. Those are the veterans that are going to receive the proceeds from the run. You can get details at theyfoughtweride.com. There's thousands of motorcycles that ride in this ride. The staging area is at Boston Harley. You do not have to ride a motorcycle to get involved. You can just go to Anthony's of Malden, go to the finish line. They always have amazing guest speakers there. There's tons of vendors there. And usually the veterans that are the recipients of the fundraising are also there to thank the crowd. And it's usually pretty powerful stuff. So that's happening Sunday, September 19th. So put it on your calendar. There's more details on the events calendar at mistresscarrie.com as well. My apologies to everybody. I did not get a chance to make it and check the mail. So I'm really sorry. There's no mail call this week. So we'll drink instead of opening stuff in the mail this week. I promise I will check it before next week. Also want to remind you guys, even though it's going to be 80 again this weekend, that fall is coming, and there's Mistress Carrie beanies and the Cocktails in the War Room hoodies that are available in the online store at mistresscarrie.com. So I want to remind you about that. And we also want to cheers your birthday. Keith, happy unbirthday. And for anybody celebrating their birthday today, you share it with the late, great Buddy Holly. You share it with legend Gloria Gaynor. You share it with Chrissy Hine. And you share it with Eazy-E. So happy birthday to you if today is your birthday. And then I also want to say what's up to everybody that has a Mistress Carrie Backstage Pass. You can get them on Patreon. We do an exclusive live stream every month where we get together and just kind of talk about everything that's going on, brainstorm ideas. They get access to blogs and photos. They get discounted merchandise in the Mistress Carrie online store. And they also get early access to event tickets. So they knew about the 150th episode Party for Cocktails in the War Room before anybody else. And were able to buy tickets before anybody else. And also they get access when I get access to concert tickets, that I slide tickets their way as well. So there's a lot of benefits to getting a Mistress Carrie backstage pass, which you can get. There's a link at mistresscarrie.com, or you can just go to patreon.com/Mistress Carrie. And here's all of the places that you can find me. I've started putting up little videos on TikTok about the podcast, and the reception about it's been pretty cool. TikTok this week, by the way, there's about 700 million users on TikTok versus 2 billion users on YouTube. Now, overall, there's more viewing taking place on YouTube because there's 2 billion users. But on average, per viewer, people are spending more time on TikTok recently than they are on YouTube, which is kind of amazing. So I want to say what's up to everybody that follows me on TikTok, which you can find me at Mistress Carrie on TikTok. So there you go. Happy birthday and happy unbirthday, Keith, says Donna. Dolores O'Riordan from the Cranberries was yesterday. Yes, it was. I was talking about that on the air, actually. I was on the air for the network yesterday, but not on the Pike. Blackie Lawless from Wasp was over the weekend. There were a lot of, I got to tell you, this is something I've noticed, and you guys can look it up if you want. The last couple weeks have been amazing for like creative, legendary musician and artist birthdays. And so if you look at what happened 9-10 months, right, that would generate birthdays, it seems like people that are conceived around the holidays, that are born in like late August, early September, and through September into October, there's a lot of birthdays for people in the entertainment industry in late August through September and like into early October. I don't know if that has anything to do with their chosen career path, the nature versus nurture thing. It just seems like there have been so many birthdays over the last few weeks, like big birthdays. Like Roger Waters turned 78 yesterday. Like there's just massive creative people's birthdays. Legend. So yeah, it's pretty funny. Let's see. I've fallen down the TikTok rabbit hole. It's pretty easy to fall down the TikTok rabbit hole. Let's see. At least there weren't any musician deaths in the last few days. No, but I mean, yesterday, Michael K. Williams from The Wire passed away, supposedly from an accidental drug overdose, which is really sad. He was such an amazing actor. Bye. Good night, Thomas. He's headed to work. So, it has been nice that we haven't lost any musical legends, but then Tracy says, shh, yeah, like we can't talk about him, knocking on wood, because we don't want to jinx it. Born in August, conceived around Thanksgiving, right? Is my math wrong? Mark, my math is right? Yeah, that's what I thought. So, I don't know what it is, but there's a lot of rock star and actor birthdays and stuff that are happening at this time of year, which is kind of interesting. So, all right, guys, I am so excited that all of this new equipment works here in the War Room as well as it does, because there's just going to be so much going on for the 150th episode of the War Room, which is 2 weeks from tonight, guys. So get your tickets. It's going to be a blast. We're going to talk to the band. For any of you guys that are not going to be able to join us in person, the show that night is going to be awesome. It's going to be so much fun. Mike Shue's going to be there. Josh Dolan's going to be there. Scruffy and the guys from the Shadows of Boston are going to be there. And I'm just really looking forward to it. I love being able to take the War Room on deployment and take it out on the road. And I can't wait to see you guys. So thank you guys for joining me for episode 148. Do not forget that episode 66 of the Mistress Carrie podcast is coming up at midnight, featuring the one and only Miles Kennedy, who I just absolutely love on this week's episode. And I'll see you guys next week. Please be safe this weekend. Know that I love you guys. And, a lot of lives changed on 9/11. First responders, our military, obviously, and the lives of thousands of families that were not first responders, but that were just directly affected by the towers and the planes. There's going to be a lot of stuff going on over the next few days with people. So just try to give each other that extra deep breath if you can, and be a little bit more tolerant and understanding over this next week because there's a lot going on with everybody's emotions this week. So, all right, guys, I'll talk to you later. I love you guys. I'll see you next week. Good night.